Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today I'm using my Botanical Blooms set, which is about to retire by Stampin' Up, and right now it's 25% off. I'm also using my Inktense pencils. Here are the inks I'm going to be using. I have Pink Pirouette, Soft Sky, Daffodil Delight, and Pear Pizzazz, all kind of pale colors. I'm using some Canson XL Mixed Media paper, it's watercolor paper, and I'm going to randomly stamp, planning to have about 2 pinks and 2 blues of this very large flower. So I'm going to stamp one at the top, and then my next one is going to be a little far down so that I have enough room to get one more big flower in between and one underneath, which I'm going to stamp in the Soft Sky. Now I tried to use several other kinds of ink, but I got the best results with the Stampin' Up ink. It just is a nice smooth application of color. Next I'm going to throw in some yellow. I'm using Daffodil Delight, and I'm going to use 3 of these flowers. This is the smaller silhouette stamp. And I know I mentioned I used other inks. I tried Distress inks, and I did a Hero Arts, and I tried a My Favorite Things hybrid ink, and I just didn't get, I'm not sure exactly why, but the Stampin' Up inks just stamped much more solid, and they blended better with the Inktense pencils. For my leaves, I'm going to use Pear Pizzazz, and you can see I've already cut a couple of flowers out of Post-its to mask because my leaves are going to be behind. And you can also see that I've tried this before, and that's because I forgot to stamp off. And if you forget to stamp off, you kind of have to start over. So notice that each time I'm stamping off, and that's because I wanted a really pale, I guess I could have stamped off with the yellow. I didn't think about that because that one is a little bit darker, but I wanted a really pale green. So I found that stamping off, Stampin' Up inks stamp great when you stamp off with them. They pretty much give you a whole new color. Now, when I stamped this one, I accidentally pulled the mask off and then dipped it in the ink by accident, so I had to cut myself a new one. I just stamped it in some green ink, which is why it's so dark green. So I'm just going to keep stamping these leaves all around, and I'm going to move my mask as I need to. I don't know if you noticed, but I also have some sort of smudge or ink line, probably from my acrylic block, in between the pink and the blue flower, and I'm going to address that in a second. But in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and stamp all these, and I just used the one leaf stamp just to make it easy without having to switch back and forth. So here is my ink smudge, and I thought about starting over. I really did, but then I really didn't want to because I already started over because I didn't stamp off. So I'm going to take my sanding block, and I'm going to be really careful not to go too far down into the cardstock, and so I faded it enough to where I was happy with it. Okay, now I'm going to take my Inktense pencils. For the pink, I'm going to use Cherry, which is kind of a dark pinkish red. I'm going to start by coloring a circle in the center of the flower, and then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to flick upward with it. So I'm going to draw one line down the middle and make it pretty long. And then I'm going to draw additional lines kind of off to the side and curving a little bit. So you want to follow the line of the petal, which is why it's easy to draw that center line first. It kind of gives you a guide for the rest of the lines. And I'm doing this with a pretty sharp tip because I do want to maintain these lines. These are like kind of flower veins. I'm also going to color the very tips of these petals. And I'm kind of holding my pencil upright so that I get a dull edge. And I'm doing little baby half circles. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the edges of these petals, the way they stamp, is kind of rough, and I want to maintain that. So I'm just kind of following the lines of these petals with tiny little circles that sort of all connect to each other. And the tip of my pencil is pretty dull so that I don't get any kind of grooves in my paper. So it's the opposite of what I did with the flower veins. And that's all the coloring I'm going to do. So now I'm going to grab my aqua painter and a tissue, and this is just a barrel of water. Then you squeeze it, it comes out the brush. I'm going to start right at the tips of the lines that I drew, and I'm going to push my brush to the outside until I meet the color on the tip, and then I'm going to blend that kind of a little bit toward the center, but I'm going to use my tissue to wipe out any excess color. My second step is to kind of redraw those lines with my aqua painter, starting from the inside and then flicking outward. And I'm never going to go out to in, I'm always going to go in to out. All right, so doing this again, you can see I'm kind of pushing my brush to the outside of the petal, pulling the color in a little bit, and then flicking outward from the center to blend in those flower veins. Again, kind of pushing it out to pull the color in a little bit. So I'm not going to pull it in too much. because I do want to maintain pink flowers with just some red lines in them. So I'm going to go all the way around. I'm using this technique on every single flower, so it's very repeatable, it's very manageable if you just take it petal by petal. All right, flick one more time, and that completes my pink flower. So that's all there is to it. Now there's another step I'm going to do with some black, but that's going to come in a little bit. So I'm going to follow these steps every time in the same manner for each one of these flowers. So I'm going to fast forward this so you can sort of see it coming together. Since you already know the technique, I'm just reapplying it every single time. But the idea is that you want to have a really light color for your ink and then accent it with a darker color. And each time I switch colors between the blue and the yellow also, I'll slow down. So here I am, green, aquamarine, and show you what color, but I'm also going to list them on the blog post. So sit back, relax, and watch me quickly finish up the rest of these flowers. I'm going to use the same technique, here's spring green, for my leaves. I'm going to draw a line up the center, and then I'm going to draw some lines outward so that it looks like a leaf. And then I'm just going to pick one side, color it in a little bit, and then take my aqua painter and blend the whole thing. Now I'm a little less specific with the technique on these leaves because some of them are big, some of them I can fit some lines, some of them I can't. But it really doesn't matter. You just want to get some different colors that look like sort of a texture. So I'm just going to kind of skip over this, but essentially just draw as much as you can, some lines, and then color along one edge, and then I'm really just kind of throwing some water on top. I'm not specific at all. Anyway, so I'm going to do all these the same way, but I'm going to skip over it since it's the same technique. And here I am doing my last one, and you can use this opportunity also to fill in any white gaps that you had from the masking. For the centers of my flowers, I'm going to take some ink black. I'm going to draw a little dot in the center, and then I'm going to take my aqua painter, and I'm going to be really careful here because you don't want to overdo it with the black, but it does add some really nice dimension. I'm going to flick 3 or 4, maybe 5 times with my brush, and I'm going to do it so that there's not a whole lot of water coming out of my brush, so it's a little bit drier, because if I have too much water, it's going to pull it in a thick line, and I don't want that. I'm always flicking outward from the center, and then you'll also notice that as I continue flicking, the black fades and fades from the center, and I'm going to kind of replenish that with a marker to make it darker. But the idea is I want to get just some accented black lines that are coming out of my flower and fading as they get to the outermost edge of the petal. So this is a pretty easy way to add dimension. Now I'm going to do that with all of them, including the yellows. And now I'm going to start adding some detailed dots in the background. So I wasn't sure how this was going to look, so I started with crumb cake because it's just a lighter color. And I'm just adding these tiny little dots. I'm just going really up and down on the cardstock with the fine tip of the Stampin' Up! Crumb Cake marker. And I'm doing some groups of a lot of dots and then spreading them out in some areas, so it's really quite random. And after I was finished with the crumb cake, I thought, yeah, I kind of like this, so I'm going to add some black. So I grabbed my black marker and I did the same thing, but I added about half as many black dots as I had crumb cake dots. And I'm really focusing between the flowers and going out a little bit, but not too far out from the flowers. So I'm trying to keep the white area pretty white. All right, I have one final detail, and that is to kind of replenish that black from the center of the flower. And I'm just taking that same Stampin' Up! Black marker and just adding a bunch of little dots to the center. I'm going to add a bunch in the middle of the big flowers and just a few inside the little flowers. And that completes all the flower coloring. I'm pulling a very simple happy birthday sentiment from this woodland gift set by Mama Elephant. I didn't want something really fancy, I just wanted something simple so that the focus would stay on the flowers. Now I covered up the happy with some surgical tape, inked it up, and now I'll remove my tape because I wanted to split this sentiment on 2 lines. So I'll do the bottom one first, which is birthday, and then I just did the same thing, covering up the birthday with the surgical tape, inking it up with some Memento Tuxedo black ink, and then stamping it down. I just centered the happy over the birthday. Now I also trimmed this panel about 1/8 of an inch on each side and put some Scotch foam on the back and adhered it to a Nina A2 size folded card. And that is the card for today. So I think a pretty manageable way of creating these flowers if you just take it step by step. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.